Yay Media Group.
Yo, what's up, everybody? This is your boy Cornelius Lindsay back with another episode of This Is Life with Heather and Cornelius. Super excited to be with you, and I am very excited. I have a very special guest, Dr. Dharius Daniels, with me. Prolific speaker, author. I mean, he has all the things behind him, and super excited to have a very awesome conversation with him today. Dharius, thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it, brother.
Man, I'm looking forward to the conversation and super excited about what you're doing. And man, let's bless the people. Bless ourselves and the people.
So I've been really on this kick about authenticity, vulnerability, what it looks like, what it's supposed to mean, and how it looks for different people. So I've had the pleasure of being able to kind of talk with different people in different sectors to get an understanding of what authenticity looks like for them. So I want to begin by asking you, as a pastor, as a preacher, as a father, as a husband, what does authenticity look like for you?
Man, that's a great question. And we could spend the whole conversation on how I've had to navigate through some of this. It's probably been one of my greatest tension points, but basically, if I were to just kind of give a Cliff Note version of it, what I would say is, it is me being faithful to and true to all that I feel like God's called and created me to be. And the emphasis is on the all, because that's kind of been a tension point for me, particularly trying to live authentically as a spiritual leader. I think spiritual leadership complicates authenticity.
Hold up. Since you went there, what are the impediments? What is the part of spiritual leadership that kind of keeps individuals from living their authentic selves?
Well, I think one of the impediments is this, Cornelius, and this is a harsh word. It's just and it may not be the word that best describes it, but it is the word that's coming to my mind right now, top of mind. And that is authenticity is expensive. It costs you. And when I say expensive, I don't mean like monetarily necessarily. That can be a part of it. But there is a degree of, and I'm going to use this word intentionally, I mean this word. There's a large degree of, at least the Christian circles I run in, there's a large degree of pretension that exists. And there's this expectation that you kind of conform to the pretension. And whenever you step outside of that, which to me, the pretension is dysfunctional. But when you step outside of the pretension, you start actually functioning like a human that God created you to be, then all of a sudden, it's almost like those that are so accustomed to seeing pretension, which is dysfunction, see you actually step outside of pretension into authenticity, they start responding to you like you're dysfunctional. So the vitriol, the critiques, the criticism, all of those sorts of things. And, it's not an excuse to not be authentic. It is just a price you pay for authenticity. And I think it's complicated more when you're a spiritual leader, because people have different sorts of expectations for spiritual leaders, most of which are not grounded in scripture, grounded in culture. But there is pressure that you can feel from time to time to conform to that. And I had to get to a place where I decided I got to choose my heart. I'm going to choose the heart of living with pretension. I'm going to choose the heart of being authentically who I feel like God's called me to be. And I chose the latter, and I'm grateful for it.
So let me ask you a question with that. If anything is expensive, that means that it comes with a price on the back end. Yeah. What is the price that you've had to pay for being authentic?
I would say there's going to be the price of obviously increased criticism. There's a price of some relationships. Like I thought the relationships were based on who I really was, but those relationships were based on like a version of who I was. I can get specific if you want, not the relationships itself, but not the people itself.
I'm about to say, hey, you about to call out names?
Nah, but like definitely, just like increased criticism. That's one. Some relationships, and then like two, for lack of a better word, I guess opportunities, if you want to call it that, access. opportunities would probably be the top three things that I would say, like, yeah, increased criticism, loss of relationship, and loss of some access, quote unquote, opportunities.
Why do you feel like there is this sense of and I don't want to put this word in your mouth, but it's the word that I'm using right now. Why do you feel like there is this sort of insecurity or pretension? Why do you feel like it is that when it comes to spiritual leadership amongst circles, communities, friendships, and all that kind of stuff?
I'm not sure what the like dominant factor, contributing factor would be. I feel like it's probably a combination of a few things. I think like probably a couple of things that come to my mind are, and man, I know we're going down a rabbit hole here, and I know it's a super, super diverse audience, but I feel like in large part, there's this understanding of spirituality in general that, like, the word we use, I don't know what the cultural term would be, mentors, apprentices, but in my space, it's disciples, people. Like, this whole idea of like becoming more spiritual is really becoming more pretentious, but people don't know it, right? So they don't know that instead of becoming a more authentic and fuller version of who you're created to be, you're kind of being discipled or mentored or formed into the dominant behaviors of the dominant disposition, which is to portray myself as something that I'm actually not, to ignore struggles that I actually have, to suppress emotions that humans are supposed to feel. So it's a very warped and dysfunctional and even unbiblical understanding of spirituality. And I think that creates that culture in the spiritual community in general. And then because spiritual leaders are expected to be more of what everybody else is, it's like you're supposed to be more perfect, more, to me, more fake, more more pretentious. That's kind of that, that's the one thing that I feel like is one of the major contributing factors.
Right. And as someone who has been able to, escape that box of pretension and be able to live, in a very authentic way. And, just looking at your life, you're not just the typical preacher. You're also the entrepreneur. It's like you have these different layers to yourself. So how do all these different layers, how do they play into you continuously being authentic? And then a caveat along with that, how does that, or does it keep you from also being able to be vulnerable with all these different individuals that you speak to in these different layers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll speak to the vulnerability part first. Here's what I'm going to say. And I love the way when you opened up, you use those two different words, authentic and vulnerable. So I'm going to say I am universally authentic. Now, meaning whatever version of me that you get based on the context you're in, that is really me. So if you run into me in the coaching space, that is authentically me. And if you run into me in the academic space, that is authentically me, because who Dharius is a compilation is an individual that's a compilation of different interests, passions, giftings, none of which I believe God intended for me to waste. I don't think he gives me anything to waste. I think wastefulness is poor stewardship. I think that's an insult to my creator. So I am authentic. Here's the thing. I am strategically vulnerable. Now, what does that mean? What I've learned is vulnerability is not something you're entitled to from me because you want it. It's something you earn because you prove safe. You're not entitled to it just because you want it from me. Have you demonstrated the kind of character to me that says you're safe for me to be vulnerable with? So authenticity for me is, I am not going to present to you anything that's not true. Vulnerability speaks to me being, I'm going to expose to you more things that actually are. And so I'm not going to share something. I'm not going to present something that's not who I really am. So I'm going to be authentic. But depending on how safe I deem you to be, how necessary I feel like that vulnerability is, that is going to determine whether or not I show you all that is true. So I'm probably more vulnerable in what I do in the entrepreneurial space than I am in the spiritual space.
Now, my follow-up question is going to be, because we keep coming back to this same point.
Yeah.
And it's leading up to a bigger question about community. And I'm going to tell you why. Kind of being out of the spiritual space now for some years, and being so heavy into it at one time, it was like at that point I was kind of like in the eye of the hurricane. You really can't tell what's going on because everything just seems peaceful. But then when you kind of step outside of it, and then you get a whiff of what happens on the outside of it, and you kind of begin to see what's going on. So when it comes to the communal aspect of the spiritual community, one of the things that I usually run across with, and like most of my circles now, are either real estate investors, life insurance people, or gym addicts. Mm-hmm. And when I run into these individuals, they don't sense safety there. So they're almost shocked that I say, oh yeah, I was a pastor for 10 years. They don't believe it because they don't sense safety there. So when you say I'm almost more vulnerable in an entrepreneurial space than I am a spiritual space, if you don't mind, could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
It's less judgment. So, and here's what I mean by that. I feel like, I'm going to use a scripture to kind of articulate what I mean here. I feel like there are certain things Christians think they have right in doctrine that people that are non-Christian have more right in practice. And this is, I think, one of the major points of the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan would be someone, we would say, who had a belief system that wasn't quite aligned with the mainstream Judeo belief system of that day. It's like, oh, you Samaritans, you don't worship in Jerusalem, you worship in the other place, and etc. But when it came to actually demonstrate it, what it means to properly love another human, the people that quote unquote had the doctrine right walked right past the guy. And it was the other individual that was actually demonstrating the love ethic in a way that was more consistent with what God intended. And I feel like sometimes that can be the case in other spaces, or spaces other than the spiritual space. And I think that there is a degree of, not saying that pretension doesn't exist,
right?
But there's not this expectation that your pretentiousness is connected to godliness. So there's less pretension in my experience in some of those spaces. So whereas in the religious space, we don't say, oh, we're thinking. In that space, sometimes people say too much of what they're thinking. Right. So there's just kind of more room for it. So there will be some things like, let's say like there'll be some things in the coaching space that if I'm dealing with a group of coaches or knowledgepreneurs and we're having conversation about some things that they could do to serve other people, create a stream of income for them, there might be an example I use of what I've done in that space that would never be an example that I would use in the spiritual space. I may say, hey, you need to try this because I tried this and this is what happened. Like right. I feel much more comfortable, saying something like that in that space than I would necessarily in the average spiritual space.
It really, really breaks my heart that it is that way. It was 2022 was probably 2020, 2021, 2022. But anyway, 2022, was like, I was at the verge of giving up on my spiritual relationship with God. I wouldn't go as far as saying I was ready to just denounce the whole thing and just be agnostic. And most of that was because I felt like this is a community that's supposed to be built on compassion and grace and mercy and all these different things. And I felt so abandoned. And so I started Alcoholics Anonymous because I needed to get help. And I started AA and I started going to the AA meetings. And at that, there's a thing they have in AA where you have to do 90 meetings in 90 days. And so I started going to these meetings every single day. And these guys who I had never met because it was all over Zoom, they'd send me their number. They tell me, "Hey man, if you ever need anything, just call me." And I call them, because it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, or they'll call me 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. "Hey man, I had your location. I saw you were up. What are you doing? Hey man, what's going on?" And one guy told me, he's like, "Bro, I'll fly there right now if you need me to." And I felt such sense of community in this community where I could be both authentic, and I could be vulnerable. And what hurt the most is that it was outside of my spiritual community. In the spiritual community, coming out and saying, these are all the things that I'm dealing with. Immediately, I felt judged. Immediately, I felt condemned. Immediately, I felt thrown away. But then when I got around other individuals, these other men who were already so humbled in their life, it was like, "Oh, brother, we're just brothers." And that love and that authenticity and that vulnerability just came alive. So even to hear you talk about how you have to be very strategic with your vulnerability in that space is just it's heartbreaking, honestly. Do you think there'll ever become a time where the spiritual community will become more inviting and more welcoming to authenticity and to vulnerability?
I think so. I think,
What
as
will
a
it take for that to happen?
I think we're in the process of that happening now. And I say that because, I do believe God is forming his church. The Bible uses wedding imagery, marriage imagery, excuse me. And I think God is forming his church into what he intends for it to be. And I think some of that is happening now. I think we're headed there now with some of the exodus and the disinterest and not necessarily denouncing and not deconstruction that leads to denouncing without reconstruction, but even some of the deconstruction that's happening. I think that the way things are trending in terms of kind of that exodus from church as it's been done is going to lead to the creation of communities that are actually more of that. I think there is a weariness that a lot of people are experiencing with church as it has been practiced. I think many people they're in a place and a stage in their life where they've got the courage to be honest about their experiences in church and the irrelevance of some of the practices of it, the inconsistencies of a lot of what we experience. When I say inconsistencies, meaning what scripture says it ought to be and what it actually is. I think people are more vocal about some of those things.
Yeah.
And I feel like that as a result of that, it's going to get to a point that for churches to actually thrive and survive, they're going to have that, because now with the digital space, I don't have to come to your building or place to hear a message or to receive something that's going to add value to my life. So what's going to be magnetic and attractive and the glue is actually going to be healthy community. So I'm really optimistic about that. I am trying, with the faith communities I lead, to kind of create that space among us. But I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, but it is something that I am optimistic about.
What do you feel like it takes? And sorry for the sweating. I don't know if I came down with the flu or what it is, man, but I've been going, my body's been going through it since this competition.
Sheesh.
So I'm like,
Man.
oh yeah. But nonetheless, what do you feel like there is a certain thing that has to cause this shift to happen?
I don't know. This is just only an opinion. It's not even like rooted in data.
Understood.
But I do think, particularly there is a degree of elitism and arrogance that is embedded into our current practices of Christianity. And I think it's probably going to take some sort of mass exodus for people to be humble enough to say we need to relook at the way we're actually doing this thing. I think as long as people are packing in pews, as long as there's numbers, I mean, with nickels and noses, as long as that's happening, I think it's going to feed the elitism and the arrogance and the unwillingness to kind of create real communities. But I think if things start trending in another direction, unfortunately, sometimes it takes crisis for those of us in spiritual spaces to be willing to relook at something and evaluate and determine whether or not this is actually even what God wants. I don't know if that's the first question we even ask. I think we probably ask what we want and not necessarily what he wants. And so I think it'll probably have to take something that's very humbling. I don't know what it is, but something that humbles the arrogance and elitism that exists, particularly in spiritual leadership, so that we are aware, hey, you might not be as aligned as you think you are with this, and you might be confusing nickels and noses with actually God's favor and pleasure with the way you're doing what you're doing.
As a spiritual leader, and I want to kind of detour here just a little bit. As a spiritual leader, have you found it difficult to create your own authentic community, just for yourself?
I've been very fortunate there. I would say not as much, and here's why. So no, I hadn't found that very difficult. Here's why, though, Cornelius. Most of my inner circle in terms of my community are friends that I knew from college.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, and I even literally, I was talking to like one of them right now is producing this pod. And it was probably a few years ago when I got to the point, I was actually inspired by LeBron James. And I kind of got to the point where, and don't get me wrong, I've got other friends, God's blessed me with other friends outside of that circle. But I kind of got to the point where I kind of looked around and I was like, and again, this is not with everybody, but I just kind of looked around and I was like, I don't know why they're here.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that they're here for the wrong reasons. I'm saying I don't know. And in this season of my life, I want to be surrounded by people where I know. And there were a couple of other my friends who both of them were in Mississippi doing different things. I had known both of them since I was 18 years old. And we just started having conversation, and one came down and he works with us on the church. The other came, he works with us in the business. And so for me, I'm very fortunate in that sense because I am surrounded by people who I used to have to borrow money from. You know what I mean? You know, it's like it's proven genuine love and affection. And if it all goes bad, if the bottom falls out tomorrow, I know they were never in it because we were on top.
Right.
So I've been very fortunate in that sense. And I think I'm very judicious and cautious in terms of who I kind of let in that circle, not because I got something to hide, but because I got peace to protect.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Coming up on a new year, everybody has the idea of new year, new me. Two-part question. The first part of this question, and this will be my last question to you, but two-part question. The first part of that question is, what does that mindset mean? New year, new me. And then if there was a word of encouragement to those individuals who feel absolutely lost in their journey, what would that word be to help them to get moving, discover something anew? What would that word be?
Yeah. So here's what I would say. I would say new year for new year, new me for most people. What they're really talking about is like I really feel like what they mean is I have an opportunity now to leverage 12 months in a way that I didn't leverage these last 12 months.
Dang.
Yeah, I don't think January creates in them a desire to be a new me. I think they probably have a desire to be a new me in October, November, December.
Right.
They probably feel like they just don't have the time to actually become it. So the gift of a new year is the gift of another 12 months for me to leverage to actually become a version of me. Like I believe most people are feeling like there's a me on the inside of me that I got to get out of me. And I think we all are feeling that tension, and people see the new year as an opportunity to leverage 12 months to actually do that. So I'm not the guy that pushes back against that statement. I'm not the guy that says that there's anything wrong with that statement. Now, I don't need January to do that.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, I just ramped up some stuff in the fitness area because I don't want to wait till January. Like, I want to do it now. So I don't need that anymore. But some people, their faith, their belief in themselves is tied to, well, I need 12 months to do it. I can do it in January. They need that kind of motivation. And for me, obviously the new year is not going to make a difference, but in and of itself is not going to make a difference. But if for you, the new year provides you with the context for more faith and more belief, and if that's what you need to get you going, I think whatever it takes to get you where you need to get there, whatever it takes to get you where you want to go, I'm fine with that. My key word is going to be this, Cornelius, it's not consistency, because I don't think growth in any area is linear. If people are honest, whether it's spiritually, relationally, or whatever, their growth has not been a straight line. It's up, down, start, stop, I was on it, etc. So I feel like the key word for whatever area they're going to lean into in the new year, the key word is resilience. That's going to be it. Or Angela Duckworth's grit. Like this full out commitment that you make to be as consistent as possible when you are faced with the reality of your own inconsistency. Meaning, you're going to be inconsistent. The question is, when you run face to face with your inconsistency in the area, when you say, I'm in the gym 5 days a week, and then 2 weeks in a row happen and you're in the gym 2 days in a week, or not in the gym at all, when you come face to face with that inconsistency, what are you going to do? And I think that's where resilience and grit shows up. I can't remember who the originator of the quote is, but and I might even butcher the quote here, but the essence of the quote was this: basically, that successful people are not people that don't veer off the path. They just get back on it quicker than others. And so for me, that would be my encouragement to anybody going into the new year: resilience.
I love that. I love that. And, Dharius, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you could have been anywhere right now. Really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me. Honor you for the work that you do. Super grateful for you for all the work that you're continuously doing. I loved even hearing the fact about how you're leveraging not leveraging, but you're creating a more authentic spiritual community just in your own right with those faith-based communities that you lead. And I do hope and pray for those individuals who listen to our podcast, who are on the fence each and every day. I talk to them all the time, who are on the fence about their spiritual journey, and on the fence about their faith, that they can hear from someone who is in the midst of it right now, who has the same thoughts that they have, but is still moving forward. And so I really hope that they can be encouraged as well. Dharius, could you kind of let the people know where they can reach out to you and where they can get more of you?
Yep. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to spell my first name, because when my parents gave me this name, it was a burden when I was trying to spell it in elementary school. But it's a blessing as an adult, because nobody spells their name this way. So, it's Dharius. That's my first name, Dharius Daniels. So it is that on everything. If MySpace is still up, Is that on MySpace?
Okay. Well, y'all make sure that y'all connect with Dharius Daniels. Again, Dharius, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me. And man, hope we can do this again sometime.
I enjoyed it, brother. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much.